I find it more important to get you to understand your camera and how it works and how to get your frames right. But singularly, the most important thing actually to make a difference between one kind of photograph and the other is how sensitive you are to light and how do you use it. ठीक है जी, आ गया, रिकॉर्ड हो गया. You can start the interview with that.
Welcome Dinesh, thank you so much for joining us on our show.
My pleasure.
And I've been a long time fan of your work. I've been a follower of yours, of your work on Instagram and Facebook and other than Instagram and Facebook also. How did you get into photography? I don't know the history of your journey. So I really was interested in knowing the history, or how did you get into that?
So first of all, thank you very much. I've been following you with as much passion because I've really enjoyed your work and really love what you do with dance and music photography. And really, I mean, you've taken on from Avinash uncle, from and if at all, my only issue is that I wish there were more people like you, because it's so important for people to document other art forms too. But then we'll get to it another time. So my journey has been, how far back do you want me to go and how long do you want me to?
We are in 1 hour. We have a 1 hour thing. And, but I really want to know how you started. Who got you into photography?
Okay, so it's a very simple answer and it's slightly complex both. So, which is the way I think life is anyway. Especially when you're 65 and you're able to look back to that many decades, and it becomes even more complicated. I'll go all the way back to Lahore because my father was a photographer and he was born and brought up in Lahore. And before partition, he was working as an apprentice with a German photographer called Rollo, who had a studio, and a very famous studio which incidentally still exists in Lahore. All right. He, of course, is obviously not there. Both my father is not there, nor is Rollo. So after partition, he moved to Simla and worked for a studio there, and then moved to Delhi. He met my mother there, they got married, they moved to Delhi. Then my father used to work for Kinsey Brothers in Connaught Place, and his speciality used to be portrait photography. Now the reason I'm laboring over this a bit is because when you look back at your life, you also look back at the influences of your life. It's very easy to say I'm influenced by so-and-so photographer, I'm influenced by so-and-so's work. But what we don't tend to do is to look enough at our own lives and see which kede influence hai. And that is something which you realize when you start actually looking at your work, looking at your own journey, that yes, there are extraneous factors too. Like I said, other photographers' works, which could be Western photographers, Indian photographers, Japanese photographers, which are also, of course, I'm influenced by. But it's also the very trajectory of your own life which really makes you what you are. So coming back to this fact, my father was a photographer. So for me, this is now the 70s and 80s when I was still growing up and going to school. And this is the film era. So it's not so simple to have cameras and have film and have processing. But because of him, there was a camera. He'd given me a camera. There was film, and we had a dark room at home. So the entire process of being able to take pictures, to be able to afford film, I couldn't buy it obviously, but he would give me a roll or two once in a while. And then to process and print at home itself, so I did go through that.
You went through all that yourself.
Yeah. So therefore, one learned the basics of photography thanks to my dad. So whether it is the exposure triangle, whether it's light, sensitivity to light, composition, to looking at black and white, looking at making prints. So all that, my groundwork was done by him. But this is through school and through college. But when it came time for me to decide on a career, I was very clear that I don't want to be a photographer. And the reason, strangely enough, was not because of the fact that I didn't like photography. I love photography. But somewhere in my mind, and which is, I think, a bit strange for an 18, 19-year-old to have that kind of idea, I thought that Hindustan is a caste system. If your father is a photographer, you have to be a photographer. If your father is a mochi, you have to be a mochi. If your father is a hatti, then you have to go there. So I dislike that system. I dislike the fact that, you are forced to follow. Though interestingly, and I'm sorry, I'll keep doing this because, I keep going off to various tangents.
That's very interesting because I like all those references.
In later years, and I would say especially in the last decade or two, where the thing of the caste system doesn't bother me so much, but the fact that India is losing out a lot of its traditional arts, crafts, etc. And if you look at it, the reason for that is because we gave up the Shagirdi system. Because he said, nahi, all our children have to go to a school, all our children have to get a uniform education, and which is fine. But if you're going to do that at the cost of that child not being able to learn from their parent or their gharana, all right, or their family, the skills that families had for generations, all right, just because you think, yeah, this is old fashioned or this is the traditional way, then who's the loser? You are. So, so that's the cycle one has come through. So, and I really believe that unfortunately India took on, like, aajkal mahal jada hai, all this is being talked about. And whereas I don't quite agree with the entire political situation currently, but there's certain points which I think make a lot of sense. That if you have something in your culture to be proud of and to value, then value it. All right? Then don't get influenced by other systems, etc. Understand those two, imbibe those two, but to the extent you can make your own culture richer, not leave your culture behind and take on another one. That's unfortunately what we did in many ways. So anyway, so coming back to, so that's how my encounter with photography started. Also interestingly, two more things here. I told you na lamba answer hoega. 60 minute ऐसे ही. So the other two things, and since I'm talking about how influences which you only look back and then you realize that. So we used to live in Karol Bagh. So my schooling and college years were when we used to live in Karol Bagh. And our house is very close to a place called Lajbal Kha Road, which is at that time was one of the most important markets of Delhi. And I remember not every week, not every evening, but 3-4 times in a week, I and my sister used to walk to the market to go and buy the evening news to do the crossword. Okay? Now, walking through that market, being there, seeing the vendors, seeing the shops, etc., when I look back and I see that I have had a lifetime romance with the bazaar. Okay? Where did that seeding happen? It happened in a time when I wasn't even aware of it happening. So now tying it back to the point I was making earlier about influences and all that, a lot of these influences really come from your life itself, right? Try and understand where they are, because unfortunately, at times even if you think of that, you negate it. Rather than say, this is my strength, you say, this is my past, this is my weakness, let me leave it behind. But if you look at it as your reality and then you build on that, it can be a totally different thing. So anyway, so after college, and incidentally, I was not a very good student. I was actually a rather bad student. I was more interested in, going to discos and partying and smoking dope and, all that. So it was, it was a very fun life, but it didn't do very much for my marks, etc. But fortunately, there was a industry which almost maybe it didn't, say, this is a great thing you've done, but didn't seem to mind that. It was advertising. And so that's what I got into. I got into advertising, and not the creative side. I was a client servicing person. And then I spent about 11 years in advertising as a client servicing executive, so which is more of the management, and the marketing side of the business. Which again, and we can talk about this, as we go along, is another one of my very important influences when I look back of the kind of photography I do and how I make my frames. Because this has a lot to do with the kind of art directors I work with, the kind of demands advertising has, the kind of expressions you're looking for through that. So those things again make a big difference to the way you approach whatever craft or whatever skill or whatever medium which you want to master. So these have been my various influences. My father The fact that we own Karol Bagh, the fact that there was a big market nearby, the fact that it used to be something which I was really, enamored with, the fact I was in advertising. So these have helped create my, association with and the kind of photography I've done ever since.
Is that how that Kissa Kutsika thing started? I followed your Kissa Kutsika photos a lot. Seen a lot of on Instagram. Because you see a chair and Kissa Kutsika, and very interesting series.
It's something which actually started just before the 2014 elections. I happen to be in Banaras, which I incidentally have been going for the last 35 years. I've been going regularly. And in the last 16 years, I've been there 27 times. But that's another story. So I was in Banaras, came out of my hotel, and as I walked out of the hotel, at the end of the lane, I saw this broken down chair, lying at the corner, tutti pajisi. But what the two things struck me. One, it was under a flowering tree, and there were these flowers which had fallen on it. All right. So it was almost like someone had, full chadaya, and it was chained and locked. And that struck me that this is something which would be of value to someone, even though to me it looked like it's something which is broke. Anyway, so I took a picture and I walked off, went out to the ghats. And then in the evening, what happens is, if you've been a street photographer, that you go, then you come back in the evening and you go through the pictures you've taken. And I was already now shooting both with my DSLR and with my phone camera. And I realized that through the day, I'd photographed 3-4 more chairs in different situations. Alright? Now cut to the fact that उस time पे political माहौल काफी गर्म से था. We were heading into the general elections. Since 2012, a lot of stuff had been happening about the UPA government is shit and we need NDA and all that blah was happening. And I started photographing chairs more and more. And now in the 1960s, 70s, if you might remember, there's a film called Kissa Kursi Ka, which was a satire on the political system. Alright? And Kissa Kursi Ka, literally that film, and to my mind what it meant was, politicians will promise you the earth up to the elections, alright? They are very smart, they'll tell you what you need, what you want, and they will promise you that. Once they win the election and they sit in that kursi, then bye-bye electorate. And then they make the most of the power which that chair offers them in the time they are in that chair. Okay? Another kissa taya ho gaya. The ordinary man or the aam aadmi, okay, not the party, the common man, he is like that kursi which lies around the street corners, at the edge of the park, at the security guards. And so then, that is what I started photographing. To me, the chair started looking like humans, with their own expression, their own body language, their own condition, which was almost socio-cultural, Because the chair you'd see outside a house in Barani Bagh, its condition would be somewhat different from the chair you'd find, outside Sadar Bazaar ki dukaan. All those things for me became very real, and it's almost like studying human faces and body language. So anyway, and I was then posting these photographs on Facebook at that time. And when I finished 100 such posts, I said, yaar, kafi ho gaya, and I want to stop. Which for... But that's what happens with me. I'd start things without thinking of them as a project or a series. But somewhere you get engaged with both the physicality of the situation or the object and what it stands for. Right? For me, both things, work. And which is really why I kept going with the Kissa Kursi Ka. I still shoot them. Right? I have more than 200, you can call them portraits of kursis.
And they don't even know.
Yeah, and they don't even know. And the most interesting part is not the fact that I shoot them, that even today, even though I've not been posting them so for almost the last couple of years, almost every week there are at least 2 people who will send me a photograph of a chair and send me a message saying, I saw this chair, I remembered you.
Wow.
So that's how that communication gets built up. Towards the end of my advertising career, I felt this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be a photographer. And whatever thoughts I had about the caste system and all that, I said, chhado yaar, my first love is photography, I want to go back to it. But what I did was that since in those 10, 11 years, my dealing with photography really was more to do with advertising photography or commercial photography. Uh, I assumed that is what I wanted to be. That I want to be an advertising photographer, and which I have no problems or qualms about. I've been that for the last 31 years, and I love the fact that I did that. So that's what I started doing. Now, ना मैं कभी photography पढ़ी है, ना मैं unfortunately किसी दा intern रहा.
I wanted to ask that.
And my mentorship, if at all, is where I've looked at people's work and learned from it, rather than unfortunately having worked with them for a while and learned in a real life situation. So anyway, so once I said, I want to be a photographer, so I quit my job, and by that time I was doing really well. I was the branch director of an agency called Enterprise, which is considered to be one of the most creative agencies of the 80s and 90s. So I left that, but I was very clear that I don't know enough about studio photography, which is what advertising and commercial photography requires. And so fortunately I had some friends, not some, quite a few friends who were visualizers, art directors. And so I approached them and they would give me little assignments. And I was very clear that I'd take assignments on which I will not make a fool of myself and also on which I will not learn something. So that was one part of it. The other was that I used to shoot a lot on my own time at home. Right? And with film, the thing was that you had to be very clear about the lighting, the composition, the kind of exposure before you took the shot. All right. Now, this is something, and I want to make a point about this, is something which people who have been brought up, in the post-film, only digital era, will not understand this, because what it meant with film was all your planning, all your conceptualizing, all your thoughts, all your execution was done before you press the shutter. All right. Whereas in the case of digital, we've actually, and I'm including myself in that, I'm not saying it's only people who've been, doing digital photography. You do that, but you are somewhat careless about it because you know कि ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ computer भी है, software भी है, I can correct my mistakes, I can enhance my pictures. I used to shoot color transparencies, and as you know, color transparency meant that is it. And it was an unforgiving medium, because even a half stop up or down meant it was an unusable picture, right? And you didn't have software to hold the I'll open the shadows, or I'll bring down the highlights. No, none of it. So anyway, so then I started doing that. But about a year and a half, two into this, I realized that one of the things which I'm really interested in is using photography as my personal means of expression. And it's not just a means of making a living, all right? And what I had done in my college years is, fortunately my father used to let me take the camera and go to places like Vrindavan, go to places like Jaipur, anything which is like an overnight, bus ride or train ride away. And that had kindled my interest in travel and seeing the world, etc. Now, coupled with the fact that I spent 10, 11 years in advertising, and also I'm a Delhi, Bombay kind of a person, because I also worked in Bombay for about 3 years of that 11 years. I had realized that I was very much an urban cosmopolitan Indian, which is not what all of India is about, right? India, fortunately or unfortunately, is a country which lives many centuries at the same time, right? Socially, culturally, politically, all of it happens right now. And that is something which has always fascinated me about India. And that is the India, or Indias, I wanted to explore with my photography for myself. So there's the commercial, all right, which is because I've been in advertising and I really find that interesting, okay, and it helps me make a living. But there's also the travel and cultural photography, which helps me express myself and engage with the Indias which I love, or I find intriguing, right? So I've been very clear in the last 30 odd years that these two streams are independent, but they run simultaneously. So it wasn't like it was for a couple of years or whatever. That's the way it's been for my life, right? So in answer to your question, The camera has been very much a part of my life. More so ever since the mobile phone camera came along. I love it. यार दो हाथ है दो पैर है तो एक कैमरा भी है वरना we are 5-limbed now.
And you teach mobile photography?
I thought that was a natural thing to do if I love it so much and if I use the phone camera so
There was
much.
one question that, because you were speaking about film photography, that you had to make sure before pressing the shutter, everything you had to make sure okay, everything was right, otherwise your shot wouldn't be right. Do you think that if somebody today, if a younger person who wants to go into photography, jada wo chahe ki, if they start with film photography, they'll become a better digital photographer, or should they be just okay, chalo digital camera hai, depend on computers, like you said?
Okay, to answer that very honestly, I spent half my life doing film photography and half of it doing digital. I loved film while I was using it, right? I loved the challenge of it. I love the rigor. And I'm very firm believer in the fact that what you did with film photography was because you had to learn the physics and the chemistry of film, all right, and of light. You had to master it. And while you were spending those 3-4 years trying to master that, your eye was also getting tuned to what you like, how you compose, how you frame, right? Today with digital, unfortunately, what happens is that the minute you walk into a shop, walk out with the camera and the software in it, and which you have in your computer, lulls you into believing that you already are doing fine. Because in terms of an okay shot or a good shot, technically, the camera takes care of it. And jedi thodi bahut tohadi mistake bhi hondi hai, you always have Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever to fix that for you. So that's something which film made sure that you understood, which is what I meant, that you had to get all your stuff right before you press the shutter. Today it leads on to the fact that you can do it later. Having said that, I will talk to you for the next 2 hours about the romance of film photography. But if you told me now will you do film photography, I'd say no. Digital, I'm happy with that. But I can see shades of my experience, and which still make sure that I shoot with that discipline, right? With film, especially when I was shooting for myself and I was shooting color transparency, which was very expensive, I would shoot that one frame or those 2 frames of a particular situation, all right? Today I might shoot off 10-15 of them, knowing that it's not costing me any money, and 2, I can take a look and see which one I want later. And I even tell my students that don't waste the opportunity of being in a place. Change your point of view, change your angle of view, look at it differently, look at it from different, in different light situations. And why not? Because see, the fact is, as technology is changed, is change your approach to photography, all right? And I don't think there's any other creative form which has been that influenced by technology as photography has been, all right? Which to my mind, leads to the very interesting questions of what is conventional or traditional or classical photography. It's classical at a point of time, okay? It can't be fossilized. Because I can say classical photography in the 1920s was the twin lens camera, for instance. I don't think it came later. Or in the 1850s, it was the glass plate, okay? But technology changed, and therefore how you took pictures changed, and therefore what you took pictures of also in effect got changed now. And this thing of, there's, unless you make a print, unless you do film photography, you're not really a photographer. I don't belong to that school of thought at all. But yes, somewhere along the line, the positives of that were that it disciplined you. It disciplined you to see the world and your compositions without the camera. Okay? Because you had to make sure you had the lighting right, you had the composition right, everything. So you were actually doing that almost without, photography. And that is something which I find is maybe not, being bred into people today. But then they have the computer and they have the software to enhance and change.
But the thing is, when I go to an auditorium, when I shoot the stage, for me everything is already there. I don't have to do anything. I just have to make sure I know my camera. Or even if I don't know my camera, I still have the auto mode on it, or programming mode for that matter, with some settings. But I take pictures there, the light is being done by somebody else, the dancer is someone else, the music is being done by someone. Everything is set for me. I don't have to do anything there. And I just have to click. And with the digital cameras these days, I can, as we were discussing, I can shoot 30 pictures in a second, which is more than a video, which is actually 25 frames and there's 30 frames. So 30 frames. And I can select 2 pictures out of it, put my watermark on it and post it on the social media and say, this photography. Do you think that part of me is doing justice to myself? Because from what I have gathered in a salan chijada mera experience raha, that is when I come to the studio and I have to generate my own lights, produce my own lights, that is where the test comes in. कि क्या मैं वो कर पाऊंगा जो स्टेज पे हो रहा सी, can I replicate it, or can I produce my own light which will have the same wow factor that was on the stage? तो अनु की लग रहा है कि like in the beginning मैं अपना ही एक्सपीरियंस देना कि मैं जब स्टेज फोटोग्राफी की थी, मैं अपना लोगो पाया फेसबुक पे, लोगों ने क्या रे आप तो इतने, उस तो बाद में याद आया यार स्टूडियो भी कोई चीज होती है, हम लाइटां खरीदते हम शुरू हो जा छोटे छोटे वो मैनिक्विन्स ले आया और परवाल लगाते लाइटिंग प्रैक्टिस कर. Do you think this is something, because I experience this a lot these days, people who don't know anything about studio photography but they are very good in live stage photography, they consider them photographers. Their profile says they're a professional photographer. But when it says professional photographer, that means you should know everything about it.
Very interesting question. And obviously I can see that it bothers you.
It does.
And it's right for it to bother you because you are looking at what you think of as classical photography and what you look at contemporary photography. All right. I have a slightly different take on that. As far as I'm concerned, what's the most important thing for me as a photographer is what is it that I want to say, all right? And what is it that I want to say has to do with what engages me, right? And what engages me has to do with the fact that, I want to do something about this subject, right? And since we start talking about dance, it's obvious that dance and music for you is extremely important, all right? Photography is something which you are now using to express your appreciation of dance and music, all right? And you are a good dance photographer because you love dance, okay? Another photographer who has no sense of dance or love for dance could be a very good photographer and go with the same equipment, with the same kind of setup which you have in the auditorium, and come back with nothing worthy of it. Don't forget, in the entire process, you are the one who mattered. Right? So that, to my mind, is the single most important point as far as any art form is concerned. Whether it's photography, whether it's music, whether it's dance, whether it's painting, whether it's sculpture, you. What engages you and what is it that you want to express? And then you say, I want to write about this, or I want to take a picture about this, or I want to, sing about this. That is, and coming to the other point about going to the studio and learning light and lighting, yes, that is something which is terribly lacking today. And that again is something which, because digital photography allows you to take competent photographs in any light situation. I think what it's done is dulled people to the importance of lighting, not light. Importance of lighting. So much so that you'll find a lot of photography today has got nothing to do with lighting. It has to do with light. All right? And a lot of present-day photographers look at the kind of photographs I might have taken in the 90s or other photographers would have taken in the 90s, where we crafted the lighting. They would think ये तो artificial लग रहा है, इसमें natural कुछ नहीं है. तो एक वो language बदल गई है. पर अगर आपकी language कहती है कि light is integral to photography, which it is, but lighting is integral to light, which is integral to photography, then understand that is your expression. That is something you are wanting. And then you owe it to yourself to make sure you excel in it. And the only way you'll excel in it is by trying it, and trying it, and trying it, and trying it. It's just, one of my favorite words really for the last many years is Riyaz. And I've taken this from, the fact that Rachna is a Kathak dancer, and the fact that what I've really, because I've seen other dancers and her, is whether you have a performance, whether you have a show coming or not, वो दिन के 2-3 घंटे इन्होंने घुंघरू पहन के डांस करना ही है, रियाज करनी ही है, राइट? डिजिटल फोटोग्राफर वो नहीं करता, क्योंकि उसको कैमरे ने कहा कि बॉस तू निकल ले, मैं संभाल लूँगा.
That's very interesting.
So that is something which I've learned both from film photography and from dance. That Riyaz is at the heart, not even the heart, the soul of your engagement with any art form. That you have to practice it, and you have to practice it, and you have to practice it. Balki practice mein soul nahi hai. The word practice doesn't have the soul which the word Riyaz has. Riyaz includes doing a thing repeatedly so that you can correct yourself. Practice is कि यार फिर से कर दे. No, this is again, maybe it's because it's not, that's my way of reading it. And I don't even know if the word Riyaz actually means but that's what I'm putting into it. That you do something repeatedly so that you can correct it and you can evolve with it. So that is something which I think digital photography has made it too simple. Having said all this, there were earlier 10 photographers or 10 people who wanted to do photography. One of them succeeded and became a photographer. Today, because of digital and the ease with which you can enter the medium, there might be 100, but it's still that one. The chimera or the illusion is because it's so easy. That's the other thing which has happened to photography, which you can't, not take it for its importance, is the ease with which you can share. Yeah. See, with film photography, one, there was a correction, which is that film cost money. Okay? Then you have to be careful about taking the shot. Then you have to be careful in the sense of exposure and light and all that. Then print banawa ki na banawa. There might be 36 exposures, but do I make 36 prints? Oh my God. You'd be bankrupt here. So you make 3 prints, 4 prints. Then what do you do with the prints? You show it to your wife, or a sibling or your friend. Kitne friends ko dikha doge? 4 no, 5 no. Okay. Of those 5 friends, maybe one of them is a gallerist or someone who really understands photography. And so, it's time you had a show. Okay. So what happens? You get a show in a gallery. How many people will come there? 100? 200? Okay. Then in the gallery comes someone who is a publisher. So, I love this work, I think you should do a book. Okay. So what happens? A book gets printed. Kini print run hondi hai? 2,500, 3,000, right? 5,000. So how many people get to see it? 5,000 into 2 maybe? 10,000. So that is the extent to which you could share your work. Right? With digital today, I can come back. I don't need to come back even. I can be wherever I am and put a picture onto Instagram, and potentially you shared it with the entire world. Potentially shared with the entire world. Alright? You didn't need to go through the entire process of making a print and having an exhibition and doing a book. The reason I'm giving you that earlier process is that's exactly how it happened for me. I used to take these pictures. Prabhupada Das Gupta, who you would have heard of, and I hope people who are watching the program also have heard of. Fabulous, fabulous photographer and an incredible human being and a very, very dear friend. So I used to show him my pictures. And he is the one who said to me at one point, after looking at my work, it's time you had a solo. I said, are you mad? Yaar, Prabhupada, tu mera bevku bana raha hai. Almost use the C word. But you know what he did? He called up the person at the NCP in Bombay, which is the Piramal Gallery, alright, which is at that time was the only gallery which did photography shows, and told him that you should look at Dinesh's work, and once you see it, you'll want to do a solo show of his. And they did.
Sure.
Okay, so that show happened in Bombay, thanks to Prabhudo. Then that show also happened in Delhi at the IIC, where David Devidar and Bena of Penguin, they used to work in Penguin at that time, they happened to come and see the show. And they said, "Okay, listen, we'd love to do a book with you." So that's how it used to happen.
That was amazing.
Today, and the reason I'm giving you this nice sequence is today you don't go through that sequence. With digital, and I speak to a lot of young photographers, they're very worried about, ki, yaar, why am I not getting more likes? Because likes are a currency today. For any young photographer or anyone who's into digital photography and into social media, the number of likes seems to be what will buy him a validation in terms of what do you call those sponsorships,
Yeah, that's
right? So that a company, whether it's a camera company or whether it's a phone company or whether it's a cosmetic company, whatever, will come up to them and say, "हाँ, आप influencer, आपके इतने follower हैं, इतने likes मिलते हैं." Because see, that's become the so today for that photographer, doing a book is not as important as it was for me. For them, being an influencer is no, I can make fun of that, all right, but that would mean I'm stupid. Which means I'm not in tune with what's happening in today's world. I was like, यार मेरे ज़माने में वो मेरे ज़माने में रहते थे यार पापे, हाँ वो था, which is great. So understand the journey, understand the difference, understand the evolution, understand the changes. That's what it's all about. That's about life. That's not even about photography. Yeah.
But I'm glad that you were saying this because I too belong to that. But I belong to hard work kind. And like we were discussing, I have shot with some mirrorless cameras and all those. And the more faster the cameras are becoming, the less better pictures I'm getting. There's one thing that you have.
But just one small point with what you're saying, it just comes to that point which I was talking about. That you have to understand what you engage with. You engage with the dance. So even while you're saying that someone else is doing the choreography and someone else is doing the music and someone else is doing the lighting, you are the guy behind the camera, and you're there because you want to be engaged with the dance, right?
Yeah.
And you're not going on to burst mode, and because you're also watching, you're also getting excited or getting disappointed, whichever it is, So that's the difference.
I've never used burst mode, even though this camera can still shoot 16 frames a second.
You might say that today, but 5 years later, you might get cameras which only have burst mode.
I'll never sell ideas.
No, can you imagine if you're having this conversation 50 years ago where a person said, I will never shoot anything except on a 4x5 slide film.
No, that's true.
You didn't know what was going to happen. Twin lens will come also, and then the SLR will come also, and you'll be able to carry a camera without a tripod.
Yeah.
Which is what I mean. Photography changes with technology entirely.
I'll be still shooting dancers. So, that's interesting. You said your wife is a dancer, and I haven't seen a lot of your live dance programs. I remember Rachna ji once did a performance in Kamani, and you had asked me to shoot it, and you didn't shoot it yourself. So
because I learned my lesson.
I would like to know about that lesson, please. But how was your experience shooting dances?
Coming from the larger point, you might be a photographer, but doesn't mean that you can be a fashion photographer and a photojournalist and a documentary photographer and a food photographer and an architectural photographer and a wildlife photographer and a dance photographer. Okay? And I've just given you 7 genres. I can give you 20 more.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Just because you have a camera. It comes back to engagement. Number 1. More importantly, when it comes to things like wildlife and dance and music, you need to understand that artist or the habitat of the animal, all right? So what I used to do, of course, when Rachna started dancing, and I used to take photographs for shows. So 300 kitchiyan, whatever it was, and I would go through all of them very carefully, and I'll pull out 20, 25, which they have to be great photographs to show to Rachna. Look what a great job I've done. So I would show the pictures, and she'd go through them. And I said, hey, ye dekhiye Rachna, ye kitni achhi hai. I said, this is shit. And I used to get very hurt. I used to say, yeah, I'm a photographer. Ye meri photo ki shit keh rahi hai. Isko kya pata ki kya hota hai. I said, look at my foot. If don't you dare put this on Facebook, people will think I don't know how to dance.
Wow.
And that's when I realized, that you have to not, and that's what I meant by, that you have to understand the craft and the medium which you of the artist you're shooting, and what is their high point. What was it that they will value. It's not just about your photography and taking pictures. And if you were to just मैं ना तो dance सीख सकना, you are one person in the family who's learning dance. It's great. So Inni has a good idea of the perfect moments to take pictures. So please call Inni. But that can lead to another very interesting debate, because at the end of the day, now there are these two art forms you're dealing with. There's dance and there's photography. Now, if you're taking the photographs, and as long as you're not doing something which is, technically wrong as far as the dancer's moment is concerned, but you're looking at another point of view, because photography requires you to be more creative in that sense.
That is exactly.
So, according to me, that's the dialogue.
But I had to
Now, if I
comment. I said,
तो डर गए ना, which is right. I mean, I can understand that.
I'm not a good user.
You posted it at least. मैं तो रचना ने कहा है, मैं तो वो delete ही कर दी, मैं कभी post ही नहीं करी वो. Because yes, you have to understand the sensitivity of the form, all right. At the same time, like I said, there is also you expressing yourself about something which you admire, all right. It's like, for instance, if you're doing food photography, let's move away from this explosive area of dance photography. It is said traditionally that blue is not a food color.
Sure.
All right, and don't use blue, because blue is not an appetizing color. But if you see in the recent times, and for many years now, people use blue and use purple and use burgundy and colors like that. Because that mindset ki blue is not you. And I remember this because there's a very senior art director who said this to me once while at the shoot. Have you ever seen a blue food? Have you ever seen a vegetable colored blue? It doesn't occur in nature, so therefore how can it occur in food photography? And that time I said, wow, मेरी भी आंखें खुल गई यार. But does it mean that therefore I can't put a red or an orange vegetable on a blue plate? So that's where photography and me as a designer comes in. No? The chef might not think so. I'm not going to use a blue vegetable because there is no such thing. But with the stylist, I can say, let's put this on a blue plate. It'll stand out. So there's also a dialogue, and especially when it comes to photographing another art form. I think it's very sensitive, but therefore that much more challenging, because there would be a dialogue. You do street photography, you shoot pictures in Varanasi and Jaipur and what have you. You're never going to go and show those pictures again to the person or the people who you shot, So you can be always in a situation of wawa, except if no one gives you likes on Instagram. But when you're shooting a dancer or a musician, you are going to be, and especially shooting on assignment. Or like I used to shoot for advertising, and there's an art director and there's the client. They have the right to say, listen, you screwed up. Because they're looking at it from their point of view, and you too have a right to look at it from your point of view as a photographer. But then there has to be a meeting point. And which is where I think the maturity and the evolution of an artist comes through. Which is one of the reasons I love photographing. Going back to my advertising experience, I love doing advertising photography even today. It's because I get to work with a team. I'm not there alone. The sensibility of the art director, the requirements of the client, the expertise of the stylist, all of it comes together, all right? And I love that, because working with people who also are on the top of their game, it raises your game. The first rule would be you go and shoot there.
There, okay.
So which could therefore mean that you can't shoot, because he has a restaurant to run, he has a business to run. So what normally in restaurants what we used to do is to either shoot before the restaurant opens, which is usually at 11, okay, or service starts at about 12:30, so you start shooting at 6 a.m. All right? So these are things that you don't understand or realize, unless you get into that particular genre of photography. it's like, I want to go to Ranthambore and I want to shoot tigers, but यार मैं 11 बजे जाऊँगा, मेरी नींद नहीं खुलती सुबह. So, which is the same thing about food photography. Because food photography, you're doing it seriously. It involves a restaurant, it involves a chef, it involves a stylist, and I insist it involves both. Okay? Because a chef knows how to make food fabulously for your stomach and your taste buds. But a stylist knows how to make that food look good for the camera. These are different skills. Yes, of course, today there are lots of chefs who have trained themselves to become good stylists too, where they're able to style and not cook. There's a difference between cooking and styling. But now, the way, because plating has become very mature and plating has become very unique and exotic. So in that process, chefs have also become more, adventurous and I think have got a finer eye for the visual than just for the taste buds. So that's changed. But so whether it's a separate stylist or whether it's the chef is a stylist, but the fact that someone is styling that food for your camera is very important. Then practical thing, like I said, if the restaurant's going to be opening at 11:30, 12 for service, they're not going to close it for you for the entire day, just so that you can do those 6 shots, right? So your shift starts at 5 a.m. I have shot restaurants for the Oberoi and the Taj starting at 11 p.m. after the service was closed, right? So that you can shoot till 7 a.m. Because a hotel like the Taj or the Oberoi is not going to shut off the service just because they want the pictures. Not because they're giving you the opportunity. It's still they are the client, they want the pictures. But you adjust to the time right? Especially things like lobbies and all of hotels. They will not tell one guest to stop. Okay? So what do? You start shooting at midnight.
I'm happy I'm not in that business.
So the point I'm trying to make is that photography or any, photography is about what you photograph. Photography is not about owning a camera. So first understand what are you photographing, whether it's architecture or whether it's wildlife or whether it's fashion or whether it's dance. You need to have more than just a cursory understanding of what that is. And it will reflect in your photographs.
When should you declare yourself as a photographer?
It's like, when should a dancer or a musician be declared as an ustad? Someone else does that. You can declare yourself as a photographer if you're getting into it commercially. Because you have to go and introduce yourself to that, restaurant owner or that fashion designer and say, But what matters is 2 things. One, your skill, and what shows your skill is your portfolio. So the day you have a portfolio which represents your vision and your expertise, that day onwards you can be a photographer.